When I first met her, I never imagined she would change my life. At the time, I was just an ordinary young man trying to get by. Money was always tight, bills piled up, and every day felt like another small defeat. I worked odd jobs, anything that would keep the lights on and food on the table, but nothing ever seemed to last. Then one afternoon, while delivering groceries to an upscale neighborhood I could never afford to live in, I crossed paths with her. She was standing on the steps of her grand mansion, a vision of elegance and wealth, dressed in a long flowing silk gown that shimmered under the fading sunlight. Her eyes landed on me with a peculiar curiosity, and instead of brushing past like most rich people did, she stopped me. "You look familiar," she said, tilting her head, her voice calm yet piercing. I chuckled awkwardly, shaking my head. "I don't think so. I just work for the market down the street." But she didn't look convinced. She studied me closely, her gaze moving over my features in a way that made me feel both exposed and unsettled. Then, out of nowhere, she said something that would plant the seed of everything that came after. "You remind me of someone I lost a long time ago. My daughter." Her words hung in the air, and I didn't know what to say. It felt too personal, too intimate, for a stranger to reveal. I gave a polite nod, handed her the grocery bag, and tried to excuse myself. But before I could leave, she stopped me again. "Wait, what's your name?" I hesitated, then answered. She smiled faintly, though it carried a sadness I couldn't place. "Would you be willing to come inside for a moment? I'd like to speak with you." Normally I would have said no. Walking into a stranger's mansion wasn't something I made a habit of, especially not someone so clearly out of my league. But there was something in her tone, something commanding yet vulnerable, that made me agree. And so, I stepped into a world I didn't belong to. Inside, the house was breathtaking. Polished marble floors, glittering chandeliers, portraits of ancestors staring down from gilded frames. Every inch screamed wealth and history. She led me into a sitting room, offered me tea as if I were a guest instead of a delivery boy, and then she asked me the question that would change my life forever. "I'll be direct," she said, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I have more money than I could ever spend, but I don't have the one thing I truly want. My daughter. She passed away years ago, and ever since, this house has been silent, empty. But when I saw you today, something struck me. You resemble her, not exactly, but enough that I can't ignore it. What if I told you I'd pay you, handsomely, to step into her role for me? To be my daughter?" I stared at her in disbelief. First I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. Pretend to be her daughter? That was insane. But she didn't flinch. She leaned closer, her eyes burning with conviction. "I don't mean permanently," she explained. "I mean to live here, to dress as she once did, to sit with me, to speak with me. As if she were still here. I'll pay you more money than you could dream of. Enough to erase all your debts. Enough to give you the life you've been struggling to build." My heart pounded in my chest. It sounded impossible, surreal, yet tempting in ways I didn't want to admit. Money had always been a shadow haunting me, and here was a chance to step into light, even if it meant losing myself in the process. Still I shook my head. "I don't think I could. I mean, I'm not your daughter. I'm not even." My voice trailed off. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small photograph. She handed it to me, and my breath caught. The girl staring back from the picture looked uncannily like me, softer around the edges, delicate where I was rough, but the resemblance was undeniable. It was like looking at the reflection of a version of myself I never knew existed. "You see it now, don't you?" she whispered. I nodded slowly, unable to deny it. "Let me help you," she said firmly. "In return, you'll help me heal. All I ask is that you let me guide you step by step. I'll provide everything, clothes, training, even the mannerisms. All you have to do is try. And if you can't handle it, you walk away. But if you stay, you'll never have to worry about money again." I should have said no. Every instinct told me this was madness. But the picture in my hand, the desperation in her voice, and the gnawing hunger in my own life all tangled together. I found myself saying yes, even as fear clawed at me. That was the night everything began. That was the night I agreed to become someone else's daughter. The first night after I agreed, I could barely sleep. I kept replaying her words in my head. Her offer, her conviction, her sorrow. I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life, or if this strange arrangement could somehow save me. Morning came too quickly, and when I returned to her mansion, she was waiting as though she had anticipated my arrival before I even rang the bell. "Come in," she said, her voice softer now, almost motherly. "Today we begin." I stepped into the sitting room again, but this time the table was set differently. Neatly folded fabrics, boxes, and even a jewelry case lay spread out before me. My stomach tightened. "You'll need to look the part before anything else," she explained. "Appearance is everything. But don't worry, I'll guide you." I sat nervously as she opened one of the boxes. Inside was a simple yet elegant dress, pale lavender with delicate lace along the collar. She lifted it carefully, as though handling something precious, and held it against me. "Yes," she whispered. "This will do for now. Go on, change in the next room." Froze. The idea of putting on a dress felt absurd, alien, and terrifying all at once. I wanted to say no, to back out before I went too far. But when I looked at her, really looked at her, I saw the hope in her eyes. It wasn't about the dress. It was about the daughter she missed, the ghost she was trying to resurrect through me. My throat tightened. With trembling hands, I carried the dress into the adjoining room. The mirror on the wall seemed to mock me as I removed my clothes. When I finally slipped the lavender fabric over my head, it flowed against my skin in a way that startled me. Light, smooth, completely unlike anything I'd ever worn. I stared at my reflection, expecting to laugh at how ridiculous I looked, but instead I just stood there, shocked. Different. When I stepped back into the sitting room, she gasped softly, pressing her hand to her lips. "My dear. It's like looking into the past." Her words sent a strange shiver down my spine. She guided me to sit, brushing invisible wrinkles from the dress as though fussing over her real daughter. Then came the wig, a cascade of dark, glossy hair she pinned carefully over mine, followed by light touches of makeup. Nothing dramatic, just enough to soften the edges of my face. When she finally turned the mirror toward me, I nearly staggered. I didn't look like myself. I looked like someone else, someone delicate, poised, and strangely familiar. For a moment, I almost believed the photograph I had seen had come to life. "You see it now, don't you?" she said gently. I swallowed hard. I don't know. But the truth was I did see it. And that scared me more than anything. From that day on, she began training me. She insisted I move into the mansion. "It will be easier if you live as her full-time," she explained, and though I hesitated, the promise of comfort and wealth pulled me deeper. The first few days were all about posture, speech, and walking. Shoulders back, chin up. "No, not so stiff, graceful," she would say, correcting my stance as I balanced in borrowed heels. "Your voice, softer, gentler, every word measured. You're not rushing. You are composed." It was humiliating at first. I stumbled, my voice cracked. I laughed awkwardly when she demanded elegance. But she never scolded me, never grew angry. Instead, she guided me with endless patience, her hands resting on my shoulders, her voice calm. Every night she would tell me stories about her daughter, the way she laughed, the things she loved, the little quirks that made her unique. Slowly, I felt myself slipping into that image, not just because of the clothes or the makeup, but because I began to internalize her mannerisms, her presence. But then came the first test. One evening, after a week of preparation, she told me to get dressed in one of her daughter's favorite gowns, a pale blue dress that shimmered like water, and to come downstairs. When I did, she looked at me with pride and then dropped the words that made my stomach sink. "We're having guests tonight." Froze. "Guests? What do you mean?" "I can't. I'm not ready." She silenced me with a raised hand. "No more doubting. You will be fine. All you must do is stay in character." They were her friends. They miss her as I do. If you can convince them, then you'll know you're ready. My heart thundered as the doorbell rang. A group of well-dressed women entered the mansion, their voices cheerful as they embraced her. And then their eyes fell on me. For a split second I thought they'd see right through me, that they'd laugh, call me a fraud, and the whole charade would collapse. But instead one of them gasped, "My goodness, she looks just like her." Another dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. "It's as if she never left." I forced a polite smile, my hands trembling, my throat dry. I spoke in the softened voice she had trained me to use, answering their questions carefully, trying not to break character. Inside I was drowning in fear. But to my shock they believed me. They accepted me. By the end of the evening, as the guests departed, one of them squeezed my hands and said, "It's so good to see you again, dear." When the door finally closed, I collapsed onto the chair, my chest heaving. I wanted to tell her I couldn't do it anymore, that this was too much, too dangerous. But before I could speak, she hugged me tightly, whispering, "You did perfectly. You brought her back to me." And in that moment, for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't pull away. After that night with her friends, something shifted. Until then, I had thought of this whole arrangement as a game, a disguise I wore only because she was paying me. But the moment those women embraced me, the moment they accepted me as if I truly were her daughter, I realized the danger of what I had agreed to. I wasn't just dressing up anymore. I was living someone else's life. And the terrifying part was that they believed it. The woman, she insisted I call her mother now, was overjoyed. "You see, you're not just pretending. You can truly be her. With enough time, no one will question it." I wanted to argue, to remind her that I wasn't her daughter, that I had my own life. But the words stuck in my throat. Because truthfully, I didn't have a life worth defending. No family who cared. No real future ahead of me. Just empty nights and heavier debts. And so, every day, I let her mold me further. My mornings began with lessons. I learned etiquette, how to sit, how to hold a teacup, how to glide across a room instead of stomping through it. I learned about fashion, about colors and fabrics and how to pair them. I learned how to apply makeup on my own, at first awkward and clumsy, but under her patient guidance, I grew steadier. By the third week, I could transform my face in the mirror without her help, watching my old self fade with each brushstroke. Afternoons were for history. Not world history, but her daughter's history. She gave me journals, letters, photographs, artifacts of a life that wasn't mine. I memorized them like a student cramming for an exam. Her daughter's favorite foods, her little quirks, her friendships. Felt invasive, wrong, but I understood why it was necessary. If anyone tested me, I couldn't falter. And then there were the outings. Small at first. Trips to boutiques, to art galleries, to quiet dinners where she would introduce me as her daughter to acquaintances who hadn't seen her in years. Each time my heart pounded, waiting for someone to expose me. But the strange thing was, no one ever did. They looked at me, studied me, and every time they seemed convinced. Still, the pressure was crushing. At night, when the makeup was washed away and the wig removed, I stared at myself in the mirror and wondered who I was anymore. The face that stared back felt less and less familiar, like I was watching myself slip away into someone else's skin. One evening, after a particularly long day, I finally broke. I told her I couldn't keep doing this, that I was losing myself. My voice cracked, and the mask I had worn for weeks shattered as I admitted my fear. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply said, "Do you think you had a self to lose? From the moment I met you, you were drifting. No purpose, no identity, no family. You came to me empty, and now you are full. Don't confuse fear with loss." Her words cut deep, sharper than I wanted to admit. Was she right? Had I been empty all along? Or was she simply reshaping me for her own needs? I couldn't tell anymore. But then, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a necklace, delicate, with a pearl at its center. She fastened it around my neck and whispered, "She wore this every day. And now it's yours. Not because you are her, but because you have become mine." The necklace was warm against my skin, and though I wanted to rip it off, I couldn't. Something in me had already accepted her. The next test came unexpectedly. She announced one morning that we would be attending a gala, a massive event filled with society's elite, people who had known her family for generations. Panicked immediately. "I can't," I told her. "It's too big. Someone will notice." But she only smiled. "No, they will see what I see." My daughter returned. The night of the gala, she dressed me in a gown of deep emerald green, the kind of dress that shimmered with every step. She styled my hair herself, each curl perfectly placed, and my makeup was polished until even I barely recognized myself. When I looked in the mirror, my heart stuttered. I didn't just look like a girl. I looked like her daughter. Walking into the ballroom was like walking into a storm. Dozens of eyes turned toward us, whispers echoing across the room. I clutched her arm tightly, terrified of making a single mistake. But she carried herself with such poise, introducing me confidently, as though there had never been a question. And once again, to my astonishment, they believed it. Compliments flowed, smiles beamed. Old acquaintances embraced me as if welcoming me back from some long journey. Each interaction left me more dazed, more lost in this strange reality. By the end of the night, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights, I realized something that made my knees weak. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. For the first time, people saw me, truly saw me, and accepted me. And the thought of giving that up filled me with a fear deeper than any lie I was living. That night, when we returned to the mansion, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You are her," she whispered. "And you are mine." I should have denied it. I should have reminded her that this was all an act. But I didn't. Because deep down, part of me wanted her to be right. The gala was a turning point. I woke the next morning in the guest bedroom of her mansion, the emerald gown still hanging from the wardrobe like a haunting memory. My body ached from the heels, my nerves were frayed from hours of pretending, yet a strange warmth lingered in me. For the first time in years, people had looked at me as though I mattered. Not as a drifter, not as someone scraping by, but as someone important, someone loved. But that realization was terrifying. I stood in front of the mirror, my bare face staring back at me, and I felt the clash of two selves. One was the boy I had been, nameless, invisible, drowning in debt and loneliness. The other was the girl she had built, the daughter, polished and adored. And I wondered which of them was real, which of them deserved to exist. She knocked softly on my door, breaking my spiral of thoughts. "Breakfast is ready," she said, her tone casual, but when I entered the dining room, the air was different. She was studying me, her hands folded neatly on the table, her expression unreadable. "You did beautifully last night," she said. "Everyone believed you. More than that, they adored you." I forced a smile. "It felt strange." "Strange because it felt right," she countered. "Because for the first time you were not pretending. You were living." I shook my head. "I'm not her. I'll never be her." Her eyes softened, but her words cut all the same. "You don't have to be her. You only have to be mine." 4 days after, I moved through a haze. My training grew stricter. Voice lessons, deportment drills, endless rehearsals of conversations I might face. She pushed me harder, correcting every slip, every hesitation. Times I resented her. I wanted to scream at her that I was being suffocated, that she was burying who I really was. But then came the quieter moments when she would sit with me by the fire and tell me stories of her daughter. The way she laughed at thunderstorms, the way she used to sneak sweets from the kitchen, the way she dreamed of traveling the world. I would listen, and slowly, I began to feel as if those memories were becoming mine. I could see them, hear them, almost believe I had lived them. And that was the most dangerous part of all. One evening she brought me a jewelry box. Inside was a ring, delicate and silver, with a small sapphire glinting at its center. "This was hers," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She would want you to have it." I hesitated, staring at the ring. Accepting it felt like a betrayal, to her daughter's memory, to myself, to reality. But when she slid it onto my finger, I didn't resist. The weight of it was undeniable, A symbol of a life I had never lived yet was somehow inhabiting. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I realized how far I had fallen into this role. I wasn't just wearing dresses anymore. I wasn't just pretending for money. I was starting to believe it. I was starting to want it. But the outside world was beginning to notice. Whispers grew louder. Old friends of her family began asking questions that tested my knowledge. One evening during a dinner, a guest leaned close and asked, "You remind me so much of her, but how is it possible? You seem older than I remember." My heart nearly stopped. I stumbled over my answer, but she quickly intervened, weaving a story about years spent abroad, about time changing people. The guest nodded, seemingly satisfied, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. After the dinner, I confronted her. "It's too risky. Someone's going to find out." She cupped my face in her hands. "Then let them. They will believe what I tell them because they want to believe. You are her in their eyes. And soon you will be her in yours." Her conviction shook me. I wanted to reject it, to cling to whatever fragments of myself I had left. But the truth was, I no longer knew where the fragments ended and where her daughter began. One night, I dreamed of the photograph I had seen that first day. The girl in the frame, smiling, full of life. But in the dream, when I looked closer, the face in the picture wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. I woke up gasping, clutching the ring on my finger, terrified of what was happening to me. Terrified, and yet, a part of me felt comforted. Because maybe, just maybe, I wasn't losing myself. Maybe I was finding someone I had always been meant to become. The weeks that followed felt like living in two different worlds. During the day, I was her daughter. Dressed, polished, poised, introduced at luncheons and dinners, greeted with smiles and embraces as though I had never disappeared. At night, alone in my room, I stared at the boy I used to be flickering faintly in the mirror, like a fading shadow that no longer belonged. I thought the hardest part would be convincing others. But it wasn't. The hardest part was convincing myself that I hadn't already crossed the line, that I could still walk away if I wanted. The turning point came sooner than I expected. One morning she called me into the grand study. Her hands trembled slightly as she gestured for me to sit. On the desk lay a stack of legal documents, neatly bound and waiting. "I can't live in uncertainty any longer," she said. "This isn't just a charade for dinners and galas. I want permanence. I want you not as an arrangement, not as a role, but as my daughter. Officially." My throat went dry. "What do you mean?" She pushed the papers toward me. "Adoption. You'll take her name, her identity. Everything that was hers will be yours. The estate, the fortune, the legacy. But more than that, you'll have me. Family. A home." I stared at the papers as if they were fire. Signing them meant erasing the last fragments of who I had been. It meant burying that lost, invisible boy forever. A part of me screamed to run, to reclaim what little of myself remained. But another part, a deeper, hungrier part, whispered that maybe this was my chance. My only chance. "I don't know if I can," I whispered, my hands shaking. She leaned closer, her eyes glistening. "You already have. Every day you've lived here, every smile you've given, every step you've taken in her shoes, you've been her. You can keep lying to yourself, or you can finally accept it." I wanted to deny her, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew she was right. That night, I wandered the halls of the mansion in silence. Every painting, every memory she had shared, every gown in the wardrobe, it all pressed down on me. I stopped in front of the mirror in the guest bedroom, wearing one of the simple dresses she had given me, the pearl necklace resting against my collarbone, the sapphire ring catching the light. And for the first time I didn't see a disguise. I didn't see a boy trapped in a costume. I saw someone real, someone alive, someone who had been hidden all along. Tears welled in my eyes as I whispered to my reflection, "Maybe this is who I was always meant to be." The next morning I signed the papers. Her hands trembled as she pulled me into an embrace, her tears wetting my cheek. "My daughter," she whispered. "At last." Life after that was both heavier and lighter. Heavier because the lie was now my reality, a mask I could never take off. Lighter because, for the first time, I belonged somewhere. She introduced me proudly, never faltering, never doubting. And the world believed her because I believed her. At times, I would still wake in the night, haunted by the memory of who I used to be. But those nights grew fewer as the months passed, the voice of doubt fading like an echo in a distant room. The more I lived as her daughter, the more natural it became, until one day I realized I could no longer recall the boy's face clearly. The boy had been lost, forgotten, erased. But in his place, a daughter had been born, shaped by sorrow, by wealth, by circumstance, but alive nonetheless. And as I stood on the balcony of the mansion months later, the city lights glowing below, she came to stand beside me, resting her hand on mine. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. I turned to her, the sapphire ring catching the starlight, and smiled. "Yes, Mother. I am." And in that moment, I knew the truth. I hadn't just been paid to be her daughter. I had become her daughter, for good.